What they didn't say is they're going to go back afterwards, too, and get another one. You got all year to lose weight. You're supposed to blow in your camp. Oh, man. Thank you for just giving me a few minutes this afternoon. I want to honor the time. Hopefully I won't. I've got to watch, so I should keep us on time. And I want to try to leave space in this for discussion. I want you to know that while this is something that I've done in my church, it's always for me just an open-sourced body of work. And so it's something that I'm still trying to understand. And certainly you've had experiences that could add value to our discussion, and I want you to have a space to share those. Or you have questions that can sharpen the thing that we're trying to get at, and I want you to be able to ask those questions as well, and then maybe we can just defer to somebody else who has a better answer than me. About 2 years ago, our church launched through a thing called Sheep to Shepherd, and while we were in this, it changed the dynamics of our leadership in my local church. I grew up in a pastor's home, training to be a pastor since I was a senior in high school. And I never wanted to admit it, but I think I knew it intuitively, that I'm not a very good leader. And it's hard for me to say that when I pastor a church that's over 1,500 people. Because in today's society, that's what I'm expected to be, is a leader. And no matter how hard I try, I can't do it. I can't get it down. I'm currently reading about 6 or 7. A few months ago, it was 11 books on leadership simultaneously. And what I know is every time I read them, I feel even dumber instead of sharper. It just seems to me like the people who write them write from a certain altitude that I can't quite get to. It's like there's an inner ring of knowledge, and everybody in that ring is writing books, and the rest of us can't get close enough to figure out how we're supposed to do that book in our organizations. And after a while, you can leave demotivated. So the more I read, the more I get demotivated. But when I quit reading, I feel dumber, so I keep reading. And it's this sort of schizophrenia that it leads to. It was not always this way. In the 1970s, the evangelical church went through the church growth movement. And when we went through the church growth movement, we were most of us engaged in soul-winning campaigns. This was a good thing, but one of the unintended consequences of that was it created an economy of winners and losers in local churches. So that churches that were growing were winning, and churches that weren't growing were losing. So suddenly we discovered in the 70s and 80s that there were two kinds of churches, no longer one. There were alive churches, we called them, and dead ones. By the end of the 80s and into the 90s, we started to see the rise of the megachurch movement. In 1990, there was less than 200 megachurches in the United States. By megachurch, I mean any church over 2,000. By the year 2010, there were 1,650 megachurches in the United States. So in 20 years, we saw the megachurch movement become what Peter Drucker called the single largest social phenomenon in the American landscape of any domain. Nothing like it. In the business world, in the political world, the migration of people away from small churches into what were now live churches, so they got even larger, created an 8-fold increase in the number of mega churches. Now, why is that important? Because mega churches are a fundamentally different kind of animal. They don't function like a church of 250. I came from Lakeport, where Craig's at. I spent 14 years there, and I wasn't a good leader then either. And that's one kind of church. And then when I moved to a church, it was like 600 at the time. It was already starting to jump into another level. And it felt like I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I mean, was I supposed to work with the people? Was I supposed to work with the staff? Was I supposed to develop the board? Was I supposed to connect with the community? Was I supposed to connect us to the denomination? Or was I supposed to tie us into Indiana Wesleyan University? I mean, literally, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. It was that megachurch thing starting to creep. It wasn't even large enough, but it was starting to creep in on us. The average megachurch in America right now has 13 full-time ministers, 25 full-time staff. They have on average 297 people who give at least 5 hours a week volunteerism. Well, I'm telling you that is to say, when you move into a movement like that with that many moving parts, this is no longer a mom and pops come to the morning worship service. This is becoming more and more of a business and an organization, which means somewhere in the late 90s, early 2000s, the most dominant metaphor for a pastor changed to a leader. Suddenly, in the early 2000s, the one thing that every university was trying to produce was a leader. And I think when they did this, they lost some of us. I'm not going to diss the whole leader model right now. But the only point I want to say is when you start thinking of yourself as a leader, you automatically start to emphasize certain qualities that run parallel to leadership. And you let other qualities lie dormant. You don't develop them. So when we saw the picture of what it means to take care of a church shift from pastor to leader, it wasn't just a change in language. Words have meanings. It unloaded a whole suitcase full of subtle nuances and images that the young pastor was trying to become. And it took me probably 10 years wallowing in that world to finally just have the nerve to say, I'm awful at this. I can't do it. Which meant I needed another model. So when we went through Sheep to Shepherd last 2 years ago, I found what has become for me the model of caring for other people. It's the model of a shepherd. Now, I don't like the word because when I grew up in Sunday school, the shepherd was this picture on the wall, like a velvet Elvis of Jesus, this bearded lady, you know, with these long flowing gowns, holding this lamb in the most precious way. And I just thought, I mean, that's fine, but I don't want to do that. But then I started doing some research in what shepherding was. And it might surprise you to know that when you go back into ancient biblical and actually early pre-biblical history, most of the early leaders thousands of years ago compared themselves with shepherds. In fact, while they could have named themselves anything, some of them did, they considered themselves, I'm talking about kings and monarchs, they considered themselves to be warriors and kings. But whenever they wrote their own stuff, they often used shepherding language. And the reason was they were looking for a metaphor that people in their day would recognize. And they knew that shepherds in their day, while they were largely unpopular, still were some of the most sturdy, noble, adaptable, naturally intelligent, adjustable personalities out there. You could put them in any terrain and they could figure it out. So the leader knew that if he wanted to be seen by history in positive ways, he would tie himself to a metaphor with such broad and diverse qualities. Does that make sense? So oddly enough, everything from early Egyptian kings to early Greek and Roman gods called themselves shepherds. So I started looking into it, and I discovered that many of the people in the Bible that God called were also shepherds when he called them. Moses, he was not back 40. Abel, David, Jesus. That led to John chapter 10. Let me read it to you. I tell you the truth. A man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of his sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. And when he has brought out all of his own, he goes on ahead of them. And his sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will never follow a stranger. In fact, they'll run away from him because they do not recognize the stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. I didn't either. Therefore, he said again, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. You see, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd. He doesn't own the sheep. So when he sees a wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and he runs away, and the wolf attacks the flock and they scatter it. The man runs because he's a hired hand and he doesn't really care for the sheep. But I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not in this pen. I must bring them also, and they too will listen to my voice, and then there will be one flock and one shepherd. So, Timothy Whitmer helped me to understand the language of Jesus in John 10 enough to identify 4 marks of a good shepherd. Now understand, I'm not talking about pastors. pastoring is only one way of being a shepherd, but there are other ways. I have, 2 years ago, we commissioned 388 shepherds from our congregation, and they were everything from school superintendents to coaches to stay-at-home parents to like contractors, financial advisors. They're from every profession. And what happened is, as we started working through the words of Jesus together, we discovered that this is like what we used to call good leadership material. Only we were trying to change the word. Now, if I read Whitmer, what he's saying is the 4 marks that come out of John chapter 10 are consistent across every form of shepherding. Whatever your occupation, if you shepherd the people in it, you will do these in some expression. But I'd like you to think of them almost like a 4-legged stool, not in the linear fashion. So I'll just put them up like a 4-legged stool. The first one is that they know. The second one is that they feed. The third is that they lead. And then the last one is that they protect. I think, and like I say, this works more like a stool like this. And so the shepherd is the combination of all of these 4 marks. Now, I think that is in there. I think I heard Jesus say, I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. And when the shepherd goes out, they follow him because they know his voice. I think I heard him say, they will come in and go out, and they will find rich pasture. He feeds them. He leads them to places where they can thrive. He said he knows his sheep, and after he has led them out, he goes on ahead of them, and they follow him because they know his voice. So there's a leadership component involved in this. And then he starts using language about protection. He said when the wolf attacks, the hired hand runs away, but the good shepherd does not run away because the shepherd has an ownership of the people or the sheep, whereas the hired hand doesn't have that. The hired hand is there for the job. The shepherd is there for the sheep. So when there is pressure and when there is crisis, the shepherd stays on task and becomes protective and defensive, while the hired hand looks for an easy escape, a face-saving way out. I'll pause. Are you still tracking? Are you with me? Are you bored yet? Thank you. What do these words mean? To know someone is to understand them. It is to be able to interpret someone even when they cannot interpret themselves. So when 2 people, friends or lovers, get closer and closer, the knowledge that they have of each other increases, so that in some ways words become less necessary because you just intuitively know what the other. I'm thinking of the 2 old people that were in a nursing home. I read this. 2 old women watching this talk show, and one of them goes, wait, isn't that, what's his face? And the other one goes, no, it's, I forgot his name. And the first one goes, oh, you're right. I'm like, holy cow, man. Wow. That's a level of knowledge that's way up there. When you know someone, you stand alongside of them and you know what is happening in them and around them. You don't have to be introduced to the details and to their family all the time. You can pick right up where you left off. You still with me? When you feed them, you add value to their life. You give them things that they could not find on their own. You take them to ideas that grow them spiritually or professionally. You introduce them to things that make them better people. Now, the only way to do that is to lead them. Sheep by nature are habitual eaters. What they will do is once they have found green pasture, hang on, you're going to think I'm talking about people in a second. They will stay there forever and never want to move. And they will eat the grass right down to the meristem. The meristem is that, oh, it's the wrong ear, sorry. The meristem is that place where the blade of the grass connects with the root system. As long as they eat it down to the place just north of the meristem, the grass will grow back. But because they're habitual eaters, they'll work an area until they eat the very root of it. So now the grass will never come back. It won't be good for them or anybody else anymore. So the shepherd has to move in and he has to push them before they feel like they want to go anywhere. And they get upset with them. And sometimes good shepherds get in front of sheep, and because they know his voice, they will follow him. And sometimes when they go through narrow passages and the sheep are naturally timid and frightful creatures, they'll just stop. So the shepherd will then drop around behind them, and that's when he starts driving them. Not quite like that, but he has to push them to go through places that they're too afraid to go through on their own, because the shepherd always has in his mind something that is better for them. All they know is what is under their feet at the time. And as long as we're doing, man, leave us alone. Sounds like some churches. Shepherds protect. The two biggest predators on sheep are thieves and wolves, or mountain lions. And each one of them has a different agenda. The mountain lion or the wolf is looking for lunch. And the thief is looking for money. And so in the Middle East to this very day, you can read some of Laniak's work, who studied. He went over and moved over and lived with Bedouin shepherds. And he said to this day, when they put sheep together in a pen and there is no door, it's just a stone wall, the shepherd will lay his body down in front of the door. His body literally becomes the gate. Because if he just leaves the door open, it's not that the sheep will wander off in the night. It's that somebody will back up a truck and load about 50 of them onto it and take off. In one case, they stole more than 100 sheep from one shepherd in a night because they were unprotected. So they can move them off and they can sell them. So sheep are always being preyed upon by someone else who wants something for themselves. Good shepherds know this, and they get in between the thing that they're trying to save and the people or the things that are hurting them. Any questions? We'll stop for a second. In a second, we'll make some observations about this, and I think some lights will go on for you, but I'll stop for a second so you can pause or catch up. Yeah.
This may be way premature, but I'm thinking, new pastor comes into a congregation and they have all know the sheep
Yeah.
first.
Yeah.
And none of this works. The pattern doesn't work.
Yeah.
They aren't following. You get behind them and push and they all fall over.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, that's exactly right. She's saying when a pastor goes to a new church, he doesn't take time to know the people. I mean, that pretty prophetic. Because again, let me speak in defense of myself and my fellow bad leaders. We were not taught how to know people. When the metaphor shifted from being a pastor to being a leader, then the number one thing they taught us to do was to grow the dag-blasted church. That's what every DS is asking me. He's not asking me how many people I know. He's asking me how many are coming to my confounded church. Sorry, this ticks me off because the whole church has been duped by the movement that says if we're growing, we're getting better. Dude, if you don't know anybody, you're worse. There's a relational capital here that is being left behind, and that now you're into the whole leadership model. Leaders are concerned with organizations. Shepherds are concerned with people. So whenever there's conflict, a leader will always defend the organization first. What's best for the organization? And a shepherd will always defend the person first and say, how do we shape the discipline or whatever we got to do so it helps this person grow? It's a totally different soul. So part of pastoring, I'm learning, is unlearning all the crap that they taught us in how to lead an organization. Because this is stuff my wife warns me about. She says, you go off the beaten path, it ain't good, man. People can smell it. The people who come to your church and the number one thing in your mind is how do I make my church grow? Dude, they can smell that. They know that they are helping you impress some district superintendent. And so it starts to feel sterile and organizational for some people. There's a beautiful picture here, by the way. They say in the Middle East, when shepherds, they will bring their sheep together all in the one pen at night. Because they're out in the desert, so you don't have your own hotel for sheep. So they will cluster their flocks into one pen. And then in the morning, when a shepherd wants to lead his sheep out, he steps into the pen, at the door of the pen, and he just starts to call out some names. He's actually given names to every one of the sheep in his small flock that he has. So when Jesus said he calls them by name, he's speaking literal there. But what they say is because sheep have a natural, almost discerning ear for tone of voice, they will follow the right shepherd when they hear his voice. It's not that he got their name right. It's that when they heard his voice, it sounded familiar to them. And so in this huge pen full of sheep from different flocks, you'll start seeing sheep in the back kind of nose their way up and get to the front because they recognize the person in front. That's the right guy. And they know whenever I hear that voice, he has good things in store for me. My life gets better, not worse. And so they start to follow what they know. Does that make sense? So it's extremely important that we not only know people, but that they know us. So that when they hear our voice, they start to connect it with positive things in life. Stop for a second. Yes.
This is a little bit off track, but if you've got sheep coming,
Yep.
they hear your voice, they're coming.
Yep.
I'm thinking that some sheep are
Yeah.
How does that play out?
Well, like with humans, there are leaders and followers in flocks. So they'll often, have you heard of the idea of a bell sheep? Bell sheep. Yeah, sometimes shepherds can discern who the more aggressive sheep are. So what they'll do is they'll bond to those more dominant personality. I mean, I almost want to call them personalities, but yeah, the sheep have tendencies too. There are dominant and less dominant type of sheep, and shepherds will identify who the dominant sheep are, and they will start to build, if they can, a closer friendship with them. And then, at least in the old days, they don't anymore, they would literally put a bell around them. And then the shepherd would go wherever he wanted to go, and one or two of the sheep who were now bonded with him would start to follow him. And when they're walking, that bell's ringing. And then this herd mentality that you're talking about would just sorts of follow the noise, would all get in line and follow the bell sheep, while the bell sheep was following the shepherd. So he's actually using, if I don't want to make it, I don't want to humanize it, but he's almost using a social structure that is built within animals to say, if you find who the natural leaders are and connect with them, the rest will follow the leaders. It's actually pretty ingenious.
I've also been told that when you get a disobedient sheep, one that will not listen, will not do what you need him to do, they'll just bust his legs, and then they'll carry him on their shoulders until they get healed, and that bonds that sheep to the shepherd.
I've heard that. I've read. I don't know if it's true or not. But I've heard that. I mean, it makes for a great sermon illustration. But I just don't know. I haven't read it in any, I should say, creditable, literature. So, any last comments before we move on? Yeah.
How many people would be reasonable or expected to actually know?
Yeah, you're a little bit ahead of me. Man, I'm coming. I promise I'll get there. That's really, really important. Okay, so what we have so far then are like 4 marks that all shepherds do. It doesn't matter what discipline you practice or what your job is. You can say, wait a minute, if I want to be a different kind of leader, then I can start. So my first observation is this is why shepherding is more important than leadership, because all shepherds are leaders, but not all leaders are shepherds. Because not all leaders know people, and not all leaders necessarily feed people or add value to them. And we all know not all leaders necessarily protect. Not people, they protect organizations. And so what we're calling for is not that pastors and lay people stop leading. We're simply calling for them to elevate their leadership to another level, that of a shepherd. That's the first observation. The second observation is that all 4 of these things function as one. These are not 4 different ways to shepherd. These are 4 things that all shepherds do at some time in their tenure. Now, you, like me, probably have a natural strength when you look at these, but you probably have a natural weakness. So my natural strength, because of my introversion and love for knowledge and things, is that I can feed people pretty easily. Give me a few hours with the right sources and a few really smart people, and I can generally find something to put on the table so that my people can eat. So my tendency is to come at shepherding through the doorway of feeding and say, as long as I feed my people, then feeding is the way I shepherd people. But I can't allow myself to do this, because if I'm an introvert, then I'm not super good at knowing people. You like to sort of hide and then come out and deliver your speech and then hide again. So I have a counselor on our staff. That's another thing I'm awful at. And so after they would hear me preach, they're like, oh man, you're ringing all the bells. I got to schedule time to see you. I'm like, oh, wait a second. You think I can actually help you? No, I can diagnose the problem. Now, you need to go see that other office back there. I just like to hide, but now when I see this, I'm saying, wait a second, now I need to develop disciplines in my life that require me to stay in circles where I can know people at a deeper level. Can't do that anymore. Some of you are on the opposite end of things. You are naturally aggressive and outgoing and more extroverted by nature. And so if I put you in a room with 100 people, you can work it like a politician. But I meant that as a good thing. But the fear is that you'll work it like a politician all day and you won't have anything substantive to tell them. You'll fill your conversations with tired cliches, and they'll have to find some introvert to actually put something on the table. So for you, what the discipline would be is learning to create time to get away and develop ideas that can actually develop the people that you're trying to shepherd. So one more time, these are not 4 different ways into the idea. These are all 4 one way to shepherd people. And while I'm on it, you will not be doing all 4 of these to the same people at the same time. If you look at the people that you're going to shepherd, some of them will need to be fed. Others just, they got enough food. They need to be pushed. And others are at a season when they need to be protected. So I'm in a board meeting, about a year ago, and there's a gal in our church who's just a solid person, and all of a sudden her husband just decides, I don't want to be married anymore. I don't get it. I mean, he's in a small group, he's in the Sunday school class, all of the preemptive things are in place. And so immediately the body does what the body does. His friends, his partners, they all swarm to the wound, and they start meeting with this guy, 1-on-1 and 2-on-1, and they're praying with him and saying, you need to think about this. Dude still packs his bags and walks. So suddenly she writes a letter to me and says, I'm on the church board, and I think what just happened to my marriage is going to look pretty bad for our church board when people find out that I can't even keep my marriage together. Would you please bring this subject before the board? I did. I read the letter, and I let them have the first say. Then I knew I'd get mine, and then afterwards, I knew the body would do what the body should do. It's the people's church, not mine. But there was a time in that conversation while the board was saying, yeah, I can kind of see both sides of this. All of a sudden, this thing went off in me. And I started to think, wait a second, I think I'm missing a chance, man. This is not an opportunity for me to push her or anything else. This is a chance for me to get around her and protect her as one who is supposed to take care of her. So that's what actually gave me the courage to speak into the situation and say, look, you guys, I know the situation. I know the guy, I know the gal. I know almost every detail in it. I'm telling you, this is not what you think it is. This is purely innocence. As far as I can tell on her part, I cannot see how this should disqualify her. So while you're worried about what it's going to mean for the church, I'm asking what it's going to mean to her if you make this statement. And they all of a sudden said, well, we didn't think about that. So they ended up leaving her on the board. That's a protection instinct. Now, I'm not doing that for everybody, but it's a seasonal thing. And when you can kind of go through your life knowing there's 4 things I got to do, now the people that are close to me that I'm shepherding, I'm thinking, I know what this guy needs, I know what she needs, I know what he needs, and that's different from person to person. All right? Yeah. well, I thought you were just scratching your head. I'm sorry. Any comments or questions at this point? Yeah.
I'm a little confused in this one sense of, I feel like, and I'll just speak for my church.
Yeah.
I feel like there's this movement, though, of these different pastors to bring in to fulfill the role. Like now we have the executive pastor who just takes care of the details. And then you have the preaching pastor.
Yeah.
And we've almost, I'll speak for myself, almost found a pastor for each one of these.
Oh, yeah. That's a great observation.
My husband and I have talked recently, like, if we were to ask our children, who's the pastor? Our kids have no idea.
Interesting.
We don't go to a mega church. Ours is about 400. But because we've separated these roles, but I guess I'm waiting. I don't understand that, but I feel like it's been ingrained in me. Like, I've just been told, because I've always said, my pastor doesn't know me. One of the pastors knows me. It's the one who's been hired to know me. If that makes sense.
Interesting.
Small group person. It's the one
Yeah.
who's in charge of all the greeters.
Yeah.
Like that person knows me and knows my family, but
Wow.
my head pastor would not know my children's 4 names. And I'm just sitting here, because my husband just got on the board going, how do you practically, because then I'm hearing you say that you necessarily don't do all these 4 things though,
Right.
to me.
Right.
If I'm your sheep. Is that what
No.
you're saying? But yet so to me though, so maybe it's not an error for them to break these up, but maybe they're all doing that and I just see it as broken. Here's what I'm asking.
Yeah. Let me try to clarify. If you are my sheep,
Yeah.
I am doing all 4 of these things with you or to you at some time in your life, not simultaneously. It is because yeah, to shepherd someone is to take responsibility for that person's life, their spiritual growth.
All the sheep of that church. Is what you're saying.
Well, that's the other half. The first half is, if you're my sheep, then I am doing all 4 of these things with you at some time in your life. The second half is, but you may not necessarily be my sheep just because you're in my church.
Oh, you're getting there.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. That's perfect. We're going to go at the speed that it's being absorbed, but that's really the key. That's the other shift is when they told me as a pastor, your job is to shepherd the church, and then they hand you a church of 100 people, you're like, okay. But then you can't really do it because you can't know the details of 100 people. So which leads actually to a nice segue, thank you, which is to say, so then the number of people that I can shepherd is limited to the number with whom I can practice these 4 things with some level of competence. I'll say that in slow motion. The number of people that I can actually shepherd is limited to the number with whom I can practice these 4 marks to some level of competence. Back here. Oh, I'm sorry. The comment that, hang on a second. Oh, I was going to give you this head mic. There you go.
You'd like me to
Yeah, she would like you to repeat that.
Am I on? Can
Yep.
you hear me? I just was asking, what was I asking?
What was I saying?
I was saying that we go to a church of about 400 people, and I feel like our church, and I feel like the churches that I know of too within my family, has almost hired a pastor for each one of these 4 areas, like the pastor to know, the pastor to teach. We now have an executive pastor who's the leader probably, and I was asking him, I feel like I heard him saying that he as a shepherd is to take on these 4 roles, and I was confused in the sense of that I feel like we've separated them and hired people to take on each one of those roles. And I just made a comment that my children don't know the name of my lead, what we would consider our lead teaching pastor.
Yeah.
But they know the name of the person that's been hired to know them.
Yeah.
And so it's just, I was trying to understand how that plays in with what he was saying, because he made the comment of that he should be doing all 4 of these things, but then he clarified that yes, he should be at some point then in the relationship of me being within his group of sheep. I don't know if that makes sense.
That makes sense. This is one of the fundamental shifts, though, in...
It's a huge shift. Like, I literally am blown away.
Because what is happening in large churches is exactly what's happening in yours, though it's happening earlier in yours. We're sort of outsourcing one of these things to a pastor who says all you have to do is worry about preaching. But the problem is, because we're human social people, it's pretty hard to preach to people that you don't know. At least something.
And just to clarify then, what's happening in our church is we just had the meeting, whatever the meeting is, for members.
Okay.
And my husband and I were in our 40s, and we were one couple. We were the youngest couple present, and of a church of at least 400 regular attendees. The rest were all older, and the next up was in their 60s. And Steve and I just feel they don't know, like, the people my age and younger they come to hear, but then there's no connection and it's a grave concern of ours that we're losing us.
Yeah, the shift in you guys, the shift in the model, and it's happening in your churches, whether you can see it, feel it, or not. The shift is that as churches grow, then you only have a couple of options, because you have to maintain sharpness and clarity in what a person does. If you ask a person to do something with so many people and to do so many things, they stop getting good at it. They get mediocre. So what happens is the church then says, we'll fix that by making a person's job domain specific. So what they'll say is, you can feed 1,000 people. That's how we'll break it down. But the other option is to say, no, we're not asking you to be good just at one thing with 1,000. We're asking you to be good at 4 things with 10. So you can break it down with sizes instead of domains or expertise. Does that make sense? But since the megachurch movement with an organizational business model has sort of taken hold of the church right now, everything is about becoming larger and more efficient in our ministries. And let me tell you, shepherding is messy, slow, tedious, and frustrating. It is anything but efficient. So what we've done is we've opted for efficiency in the church, and there are casualties. She's pointing one of them out. I got a couple more comments, and I got to move on and tell us how to do all 4 of these things in 9 minutes. Yep.
I was just going to say basically what you said is, if you bring it back to the shepherd, a real shepherd with real sheep.
Yep.
As the flock gets bigger and bigger and bigger, they don't bring in 6 more shepherds, because there'd just be chaos. With the sheep would still not know who to follow, who's doing what. It would be chaos. They break the flock down into smaller bits.
I'm not sure. I can't answer that.
I mean, one shepherd can't.
Yeah,
at some point, there's
right.
a breaking point where they can't handle, whether it's 1,000 or 10,000, I don't know. But at some point, it's like, no, we need to separate the flock, not get more shepherds.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah. I mean, now that intrigues me. I got to check out on that. So, yeah, was there one more comment? Somebody else have a hand up? Yes.
I was going to say, I know that as people shepherd, there is one lead shepherd, and usually if you have a very big herd, you have others that follow behind that are helpers. But mine was, as a shepherd, I have a small congregation. I know them. I feed them. But some of them will not allow me to lead them or protect them.
Right.
So what do you do then?
All right. This is exactly where we're going. Slaughter. Stop. Dude, I like your method, man. All right. What's plan B? All right. So then that raises the question of what is the number of people that I can practice these 4 things with some level of competency. So then I'm going to go back to some of the social sciences and read different sources in social sciences to say, what is the number of people that I can influence to the maximal amount? As a rule of thumb, I have 2 choices. I can either influence more people some, or I can influence some people more. Shepherds choose to influence some people more because it has a longer tail at the end of your life. The people who follow you and know you and track you and love you are not the ones that you've wowed in your leadership, in boardrooms or from pulpits. They are people with whom you've had some way of practicing these things. So there's a series of concentric circles, and it works like this. The smallest number that most people give is the number 3 to 12. It depends on who you read, and there are multiple sources on this, but 3 to 12 is the number of people that the typical human being can know to a deep and intimate level. And by that I mean, you know their family, you know their history, you know the experiences that they're having right now, you know the tensions, you can interpret them, and you have some vision or plan for where they should be next. You do life together. So one of the sayings that we practice in our churches with men especially is to say, disciple your pallbearers. There are 6. Find 6 people who are younger than you and pour all of your life into them so that when you die, they carry you to the grave, they drop you, and they keep going where you were going anyway. But that's done in relationships, not in content. It's not just content. It's not that they're impressed with your body of work. It's that you've actually spent time with them. So 3 to 12 is that number. Outside of that, there's a number of about 50, and 50 is the number of people that if you put into a room, I can get those people to do everything at the same time. I can talk 50 people into doing one thing together right now, but as it gets larger than 50, there will be people drifting off saying, I ain't going to do that. Okay, but 50 is probably my limit. Then outside of that is the number of 150, and this is about the average number of followers that you have on Facebook or the number of followers that you have on Twitter. This is for the typical human being, the number of people that you can process some information about them, but you can't always remember it. But you're still kind of interested in what's happening to Joby's kids these days. I haven't seen it. I'm going to go on Facebook. Is that? So there's probably 150 people that you care that much about that you're going to follow them to some degree. Then outside of that is the number of 500. And the sociologists tell us 500 is about the number of people that when you were walking on the street, you would see them and you could say their name, their whole name. This is Carl Balla. Carl. Now, I don't necessarily know his kids, but I know he's married to Nancy. I know that. And I know they're getting old. Okay? But other than that, I don't know a ton about them. That's about 500. And then, my favorite one, because introverts love this number, 1,500 is the number of people that the average person will recognize when he sees their face, but he doesn't necessarily know their name. So these are the people, when if you were walking down the street, you'd see them, you'd go, which means, hey, don't stop. Oh, my goodness. I go to a family retreat a family retreat, and these two guys are leaning. This is a true story. Two guys leaning on the shed when I pull in, and I went, holy cow, who are those two guys? And my wife, I'm already in those. Yeah, I've seen him before, but I'm not sure. And my wife goes, well, the one on your right is your cousin, and the one next to him is his brother, your other cousin. I went, what are their names? She goes, Ryan and Steve. So immediately, I go from here down to about like right here. I jump out of the car and I'm like, Ryan, Steve, man, how you guys doing, man? I haven't seen you like in forever. It is such a lie. It's such a farce. But I'm trying to jump. You see what I mean? But here's the key is whatever organization you're in, you will be tempted to try to function at levels higher than you are humanly capable of functioning at. You must limit it to some number between 3 and 12. All right? Now, how do you find them? What we do in our churches, some people just carry a pad, they write names down. Some people just track the names on their cell phone under the notebook file. Some of them just put postcards in their office. And what we ask people to do is first pray about this and say, Lord, of all the people that I know, of all the people that I'm dealing with right now, would you put on my heart the people that you want me to take responsibility for their spiritual development? We're looking for primarily 3 things when you start scanning all these 500 people that you know. 1, you're looking for proximity, people that are already in your path. You're not looking to start relationships with a whole bunch of new people that you never met. So it means they already work at your office, they're already part of your life, you know them, and you probably know them in the 150 at least level. You know something about their life, so you're not starting from scratch. You run into them frequently. Second, you're looking for pull. These are people with whom you have natural pull and persuasion. So they already come to you for some level of direction. So, my friend, the answer to the question is they won't let me protect them and they won't let me lead them. The answer is you can't shepherd them. They can be in your church and you can feed them and you can pray somebody else shepherds them, but you can't shepherd them. Because as a rule of thumb, shepherds don't choose the sheep. Sheep choose their shepherd. They just don't know how to do it. And so people instinctively know, who do I seek out when I have a lot of questions? So you should look for people in your circle that you see frequently and that tend to weight or value things that you say to a higher degree. Your words have more meaning with them. Third, passion. When you pray, start praying for the people in your circle of, say, 50. And as you pray for them, listen to your own heart. And you will start to feel or sense a passion to take certain people on. This is extremely important, especially for pastors or organizational leaders, because if you're a pastor or a leader of an organization, far more people want to be shepherded by you than you can shepherd. So you'll have way more pull than you'll have passion for some people. So you have to leave yourself the right to opt out if you just say, you can't tell them that. Sorry, dude, I just don't feel it when I'm with you. You can't say that. But essentially what you're saying is, I love the fact that we're often together, those kind of things, but we need to find somebody who can lead you because, man, I really want to see you grow. But right now, I'm full. I'm so busy, I just can't hardly. And they'll usually understand that. So I'm looking for people that where the Lord says to me in a private time, that person, you need to take them on. And here's the other thing. This doesn't mean you take them on forever. This can be for a season in their life. Sometimes it's for just 3 or 4 months, and then I can release them. It's fine. In other cases, it's for 3 or 4 years. And then tomorrow, remind me, and we'll start at this point. We'll talk about the different intensity levels of shepherding. I better write that down or I'll forget. So, got it. Okay. Guys, thank you for coming out today. I hope this is enough to get us started thinking about a different way of leading with less people, but with greater level of influence. So, Father, thank you for the model that you've given us. This is not just business talk. We know this. You are the good. You are the model shepherd. And so we really, now as we go home, we're thinking about how we're going to do this and such. I pray that you would take the right stuff for each one of us here and that you would burn on our hearts and minds the thing that you want us to start doing. We ask it in your great name. Amen. Thank you, guys.